We're going to be talking about statewide rail planning in Washington and Oregon. You may be aware that both the state of Washington and the state of Oregon have an ongoing state rail planning process underway. If you open up the Whova app and go to this session and click on the description, you'll see there's a couple hyperlinks that will tell you about the Washington Department of Transportation State Rail Plan, the Oregon Department of Transportation State Rail Plan, as well as the Cascadia high-speed rail planning process conducted by Washington Department of Transportation. So you can click those links and learn more, or even better, just stick around. In about 20 minutes, we'll be talking about all of that. First, though, I'd like to invite up Washington State Representative Mari Leavitt, co-chair of the Washington State Rail Caucus, to tell you a little bit more about the Rail Caucus, what they're doing in Washington, and then we'll invite up Representative Nathanson, representative from Eugene, Oregon, to do the same for the Oregon side, the Oregon Rail Caucus, and then we'll move into our presentations from the bureaucrats. All right, so thank you, Rep. Leavitt.
Thank you, and I'm glad to not be referred to as a bureaucrat for a moment. So that's great, because usually legislators are lumped into that, and it's the bureaucrats who keep things moving. So I'm appreciative for those folks. I'm Mari Leavitt. I represent the beautiful 28th Legislative District in Washington State. If you're not familiar with Washington, it's West Pierce County. If you're not familiar with the counties, it's on the west side, and it's south of King County, for those who don't know Washington. But I also co-chair the Rail Caucus. You may recall, I know many of you do, certainly for those who are Washington, the tragedy that happened in DuPont a few years ago, where 3 souls were lost. That's my district. So I started working on rail safety and rail governance issues in particular in 2018 when I was first elected, and have continued to do so. So we have what's called a Rail Caucus. There are 4 co-chairs. Right now we're down to 2. And you heard from one of our former co-chairs, Representative Barkas, earlier today, who's a big rail fan and is doing great work on our transportation committee. But we meet on a fairly regular basis. Our meetings are set for this upcoming winter session and focus on all things rail, whether it's short rail and trying to get tax incentives through to ensure that we can expand short rail in Washington State, or whether it's passenger rail and working with our rail can't wait partners and our environmental supporters, as well as others, and those who want to an efficient and easy way to get to and from places. We work with those partners. Certainly BNSF and UP and others are part of that coalition, and others who are in the room or represent them. We often have presentations from WSDOT on the work that they're doing, and they are just tremendous partners in making sure we're continuing to do work. Sound Transit is another partner. And we talk about passenger rail quite a bit in ways that we can expand the Cascade corridor and expand Amtrak for passengers, and get those on-time rates higher than the percentage that they are right now. And I know that WSDOT is working with BNSF and others to do that. But we also talk about high-speed rail. And in Washington, admittedly, we're mixed on our opinion about high-speed rail. There are some in our caucus, in our legislative caucus, who are very much advocates for high-speed rail and what it can do in the Seattle area, and others, and also champions of Sound Transit. And then there are others of us who are not so much champions of Sound Transit and high-speed rail, and are concerned about the cost and the return for the cost in terms of investment for those who aren't on the I-5 corridor. And it is a balance, and it is a tension in our states amongst Democrats, amongst Republicans, within each other, and within our caucuses. And so we continue to grapple. I know in a couple of weeks we have the Cascade Innovation Corridor Conference on the 28th and 29th. There's a session on high-speed rail on the afternoon of the 29th, and then a dinner corresponding to talk about that. And so just know that we debate within each other of what makes sense. If you were to live in my district, you would hear how awful Sound Transit is, how there's nothing that they're getting for it, how the taxes are too high, and how many are choosing just not to pay and hope that if they do get pulled over, they'll pay the ticket, which is less than the taxes that they have to pay on their car tabs. And so, and if you live in rural Washington, that's probably very similar. And so again, it's that tension in terms of what do we get for the dollars that we invest as residents or constituents? I hear a lot from Pierce County. And then how will high-speed rail benefit my community? Depending on where you live. And so we continue those conversations with all of you. I'm a big fan of rail. I'm a big fan of BNSF being strong in our state, as well as UP and others, and want to make sure that we can do all of this safely. As I look at workers, worker safety is paramount and has been a focus in terms of trying to get legislation out that protects our workers who do risky jobs as they continue to do that, and then also ensure that we're protecting to ensure that individuals can't get on the tracks. Suicide prevention is a concern as it relates to our caucus as well as relates to rail. So we talk about all of those. I had a young man commit suicide on my tracks in my district, and Kevin Carter Jr., who went to the psychiatric hospital 3 times on one day and got turned away 3 times. So he navigated his way to my district, to Titlow Park, and decided to end his life in that manner because he wasn't getting support from an institution in the manner that he should have gotten support. So we always worry about the crossings in terms of safety as well. So that's what's happening in Washington, and eager to partner with our Oregon folks, and excited that they're having the caucus. And I know they're quite more robust, I think, than we are. If you were to ask Luis, who tells me all the time, like, you need to be more like Oregon. So we'll, one day, here we are. And Portland is not a hellscape, clearly. At least in the area that we're working at, and I'm here today. So it's quite lovely to be in Portland, but please let us know if we can support the work that you're doing in the Washington State Legislature and bring forward policies that make sense for all of Washington and the Pacific Northwest. Thanks.
Thank you, Rep. Leavitt. And I failed to mention, we originally intended to have Representative Jake Fye, chair of the Washington State House Transportation Committee, with us today, but he is feeling ill, so he's not available to join us. But thank you, Rep. Leavitt, for stepping in and sharing a bit about the Washington Rail Caucus. Now I'd like to introduce Representative Nancy Nathanson from Eugene, Oregon, who's been a champion for rail since 2011, sponsoring and passing successfully several bills on rail, and also most recently HB 3233, I think it was, in the latest legislative session. So Representative Nathanson is going to tell us a bit about Oregon.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm going to date myself here. I've been a fan of rail since before 2011. Some of you know how long ago it was in the 90s when I first went up to Seattle for a conference. Although my earliest work was back in the 90s with a passenger rail corridor, I quickly became interested in supporting both freight and passenger rail generally. Because given our country's history with rail, and literally the railroads, investments will often benefit both freight and passenger, particularly if we're talking about the Class 1 lines in Oregon and Washington, UP and BNSF. I meet with the short lines too, and recognize very much the significance of short line rail moving commodities and products, supporting local economies and local jobs. I have been encouraging regional planning starting several years ago with passenger rail, since the equipment or the train sets and the scheduling on the Cascadia corridor really needed to be coordinated between Oregon and Washington. I'm going to step back here for just a minute and mention that in 2011, one of my first bills that I passed, in case this sparks an interest, and I'll tell you, this was baby steps. This is not really everything I wanted, but early in my career, I've been in elected office in the legislature since 2007. In 2011, I was trying to pass a bill. There was strong opposition, and I would scale back because I'm very much an incrementalist. I don't work on the premise that if I can't have everything, I don't want anything. I think it's important to take one step at a time, build on success, and take the next step. So in 2011, I was working on the problem of losing right-of-way that could have been important for expanding rail corridor, for a parallel track, for lengthening a siding, for increasing station access. So what I ended up with in 2011 is I passed a bill that requires any public agency, like cities and counties, to notify our Department of Transportation if they were selling public property in 100 feet of a rail line or within 500 feet of a rail crossing, because that should not be an opportunity lost because no one was paying attention. Even though the bill had strong opposition, once I scaled it back to that, we did get it passed. So Oregon Department of Transportation has 30 days to respond to that agency and say, we need that, we want that property, we want to buy it. They have 30 days to respond. In 2015, I worked on another bill to improve on-time performance, because that's one of the two most important things that we heard passengers need. They need more options per day, and they need on-time performance. So I passed a little tiny modest bill asking ODOT to look into it, report to the legislature, identify bottlenecks, needs, and solutions, and so forth. In 2013, though, here was the big one that I started with. I said, we've got to have coordination and collaboration. The bill was not supported really enthusiastically in Washington, because the director of DOT in Washington and the director of DOT in Oregon had a good working relationship. They said, no, we've got it. Everything's fine. We talk, everything is fine. I said, this is not okay. We should not do public policy based on two people getting along. What happens if a personality changes? We need to codify this. Now, at the time, it was my understanding that a sister bill, a corollary bill, would be passed in the state of Washington. I got a bill passed in Oregon saying that our DOT will collaborate with Washington on planning and operations of the passenger rail, the Cascadia passenger rail corridor, because it's a single line, and the train sets, the schedule needed to be coordinated. It passed in Oregon. It didn't pass in Washington. That was a disappointment, but it was still on the books. It was clear direction that the legislature says we should collaborate. So fast forward to what I did this year. I expanded the idea. I made it bigger. I changed it from permissive, allowing DOT to collaborate, to insisting, requiring that DOT collaborate with other governments, plural, not just the state of Washington. And we passed the bill. So it took us several steps beyond just collaborating on a single passenger rail corridor. It now addresses passenger and freight rail. It says we will coordinate and we will look for opportunities with any government partner, even beyond the borders of the United States, because we know that trade with Canada and travel in that corridor is going to include two nations, as well as different states and provinces. A year ago, last October, state legislators from Oregon, Washington, and Montana connected at the Greater Northwest Rail Summit. The topic was regional and national investments in passenger rail and how we could best collaborate. It seemed like the leaders were ready to work together to meet our shared interests and how to improve passenger and freight rail and secure federal funds. That was a key objective. How do we secure federal funds? We knew that agreeing to work together on infrastructure needs made sense. So this bill now requires ODOT on the Oregon side to update its passenger rail plan to include strategies to boost capacity, to upgrade and improve railroad track and related infrastructure. Because I said it can't be just about track, literally. It requires ODOT to report on federal rail infrastructure grant applications submitted, because as legislators, we felt like, did we actually hear, are we getting reports? Did our DOT really apply for every grant that was possible, or did we miss an opportunity? We want to know that we're trying for everything we can. And This reduces, the bill reduces the reporting burden for ODOT a little bit, because after I had passed 2 or 3 different bills requiring reports on this, that, and the other, our agency staff came to me and very politely and effectively said, couldn't you make this simpler for us? And I said, you bet, we'll do that. And so we made it a little bit streamlined for them. Inspired by conversations with our rail legislative colleagues in Washington, and by significant federal funds that at the time had been allocated by Congress, it now allows our Department of Transportation to enter into agreements with any other public body to work on shared objectives for passenger and freight rail, and to develop regional improvements and approaches, and to work together on proposals for federal funding. We knew that we were going to work with Washington, of course, but I wanted this to be very broad to enable working with any of the partner states and provinces. So I think it's a solid strategy. Joint grant requests for federal funding might very well get more attention and additional federal support. I certainly hope it does. I don't know it will. It can't hurt. The organizations who supported the bill included Penwar, All Aboard Northwest, Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority, the Oregon chapter of the American Planning Association, the Association of Oregon Rail and Transit Advocates, a transit agency in Salem, the capital of Oregon, and others. So I was really energized by that. I stay energized, and I'll stay tuned to see what you all have in store for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Nathanson, and thank you for your leadership on rail issues. I'd like to invite up now our featured speakers, presenters, Jason Biggs, the Director of the Washington State Department of Transportation Rail, Freight, and Ports Division, Suzanne Carlson, Administrator of ODOT's Public Transportation Division, and Chelsea Levy, who is the lead on Washington Department of Transportation's high-speed rail planning project. Suzanne's going to start us with the state rail plan in Oregon, which is very much connected in many ways to Washington's state rail plan. So they'll pass it off to each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome to Oregon. Thanks all of you for coming who came from out of state. Glad to have you here. And thanks to Representative Nathanson, who gave a great introduction and some great detail and saved me a little bit of talking on one of my slides. So just a moment, let me get started here. So we're going to talk, as has been introduced, we're going to talk about our state rail plans, but also some of the work we're doing to move forward into infrastructure investments, which is really a big part of the whole purpose and really helps us move forward in enabling rail travel. Let's see. Great. So the Amtrak Cascades corridor, as you can see here, and hopefully many of you are users who take Amtrak Cascades. I actually took it up here this morning, so count myself among that. We run from Vancouver, BC to Eugene. There's 4 trips a day, so the primary leg is going from Portland to Seattle 6 times a day, excuse me, and then also two trips up to Vancouver, BC, 2 trips down to Eugene every day. And we actually supplement on the Oregon side with a point bus. So we meet most of those trains and run people down to Eugene, whether it's a bus or a train. So WSDOT, Jason and I work together quite a bit and partner on contracting with with Amtrak to operate that service. This is an intercity passenger rail service, so routes that are, probably most people in this room know this, under 750 miles are state supported, which means that the states do pay the cost net of the revenue that we get. So we partner together to fund the system. So in Oregon, we're mostly operating on Union Pacific rails. The rails are mostly privately owned. And then in Washington, they run on BNSF as well as some Sound Transit. So there's a lot of coordination that happens. This is a lot of entities bringing you the service. As noted, we're going to talk a bit about a state rail plan. Just so happens that we're both updating our state rail plans right now. These are federally required plans to be updated every 4 years. So we're in that cycle right now. So doing a lot of data analysis, a lot of outreach, and a lot of modeling and just regrouping around what we want that future of rail to look like. So there's some, I won't necessarily read them all here, but you can see on the slide here some of the factors we're looking at. So the on-time performance, and Jason will address that a little more later. increasing capacity to meet demand. So we have really high ridership, and how can we accommodate more people on the train in the future? Looking at maintenance issues, which is certainly a big challenge, environmental impacts, what we're doing with equipment, connectivity, how people can walk, bike, and roll and take transit to the train stations. And looking, of course, at grade crossing safety as well. I'll talk about that on a future slide here. So for Oregon, we have 9 modal plans. They all sort of nest underneath our Oregon Transportation Plan. We just did a major update to our Oregon Transportation Plan. I want to say it was 3 years ago. I think it was in 2022. And so the state rail plan is underneath that. So really the goals and values that we put in there should match up to what you see in our overarching transportation plan. So it's going to include vision and goals, first of all, which I didn't put on there, but we will have the vision for state rail, as well as a framework for guiding public investments, and what kind of equipment we'll need going forward, as well as the state rail needs inventory. So we'll have a list of potential projects, not necessarily prioritized by each project, but a list of projects you could look at that if you wanted to make a certain type of investment or had a certain type of grant opportunity or investment opportunity, we could go to that list and identify projects that have already been put on that list. And then also evaluation tools that would help us look at that list and pull projects off it in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. Awkward. I have to add some reading glasses here to make sure I'm hitting all my points. We also will be looking at our high-risk crossings. So that's certainly, when the trains come into your community, we want to make sure it's safe to be walking and getting to school and getting around the communities. So we'll be looking at high-risk crossings and developing a list that we can also make federal investments in to fix those crossings as we go forward. Public feedback is a really important part of this. We had a lot of public outreach, and we did a survey in May. I'll show you some results in just a moment, but I want to make sure to mention that we'll have a virtual open house opening on October 28th. It's on a website, so it's not a place. You will not go there, but you will go there online, and it'll be open for a little while, and you can learn all about it and provide feedback on that online open house. We've done interested party interviews as well. We're going to be doing a few more of those. And we also do tribal consultations, so government to government consultation and making sure we get tribal input. And we've been doing that over the last couple of years. So here's the key themes I alluded to. We had 1,500 people respond to this survey. So we were quite pleased with the input. And again, knowing who's in this room here, I'm sure many of you took the survey once or twice or had friends and family jump in there as well to share your views on the state rail. The themes that came forward are really the same themes that we saw in the last rail plan. So this is really just an update, and those same themes are carrying forward, which is safety, of course, being primary for the users, for people taking it, people walking in their communities, and for shippers and freight rail using the rails as well. Excuse me. Mobility and accessibility, so making sure that we're serving all communities and all kinds of people who want to get on the trains. Stewardship would mean all kinds of things, the financial investment we're making, as well as the economic and environmental impacts from the system. And then resilience. So again, climate resilience, making sure the trains will continue to run, but also the economic resilience and making sure that we have a good system that'll provide job access and support businesses, as well as giving us these travel opportunities. Okay, I'll jump a little bit in, and WSDOT will talk about this as well. The corridor identification and development program and the service development plans that we have, looking towards the future of the system and how we can maintain what we have and improve performance, as well as looking towards the future. So this is really the blueprint for our capital improvements going forward. And if we want to add more capacity and more service, how we would get there and what type of investments do we need to make. So we're hoping to get federal funding, of course, leveraging our state match funds that we need to put forward, and then getting federal grant opportunities as they come available. So again, this is part of the corridor identification and development program. So we're already entered into that as a corridor, which sort of fast tracks us, if you will, into getting grants. We're already going through a process to develop this list and share it with the federal government and be queued up for the opportunities as they open. We are awaiting FRA approval for the next step. For Oregon, we already have a service development plan, and then WSDOT will share more about where they are in that process. And again, we work really closely with the Federal Railroad Administration, Union Pacific, and Amtrak on our side, and I'm sure you guys have additional partners as well. And I think I already covered that one. Yeah, just that we'll have, I'll talk a little bit on the next slide, actually, on that last bullet point there. So as I noted, ODOT already has our service development plan, and what we're working on right now is the implementation plan on that. So really a much more literal roadmap of the investments we want to make, the projected costs and sort of the staging and phasing of that, which investments we want to make first to move forward. And we're looking at staggering that so we can bundle those investments together if we want to expand by 1 or 2 trips per day. We'll make a certain type of investments and then building that up to 3, 4, and 6 routes altogether. We've just completed, or we're at the very tail end. I'm eyeing my consultant in the back who's been nodding his head as I go here. He's like, yes, you got it. We were just finishing up our computer modeling. So we've been working really closely with FRA and modeling future projections of passenger rail as well as freight rail on the system, and then looking what the conflict points would be, which is really informing where we need to make investments. So looking to reduce those conflicts before they happen and make the investment so that there'll be faster performance and better performance as we go forward. And also which ones will be required for increasing the speeds. And then I already mentioned the last point, which is just really bundling those together so that we can get those increased frequencies. And we actually think we'll create a lot of safety benefits kind of before we put those frequencies on. So as we make those investments, we'll be making safer crossings in communities, reducing conflicts in advance. And this is where Representative Nathanson already gave you some great information, and I was really glad to hear from her what her vision was in introducing House Bill 3233. We're kind of the, we go up there and testify and give our point of view, but we're really there at the direction of the legislature to report out and make investments and do the work based on their vision. So as she noted, this is just changing the sequence of the reporting, making the reporting maybe more meaningful in a way because it's really more of a plan, and then also sort of reporting back. What are you doing with that plan? Did you just have a plan or with a list of projects, or are you moving forward looking for funding for that? So also reporting out on when we go after those grant opportunities. And then as she mentioned, continuing and strengthening the collaboration and working with our partners to make sure we're all in it together and moving forward together. We had a much longer and more elaborate legislative session. For those who are Oregonians, it was a dramatic time, but that one was maybe one of the less controversial wins that we're now implementing. We've had some recent successes in our construction projects. So we've invested in 2 projects, and probably many of you are already familiar with these, but North Portland Junction and Peninsula Junction between Portland and Vancouver, Washington. And if you, like me, are a rider of the system, you know that it used to go super, super slow, and you'd be on that train going, what is happening and when am I getting home? So we've sped up trains from 10 miles an hour to, I think it's 25 miles an hour, Jen? Yes, in that section. We had 2 pending grant applications with the FRA with the federal and state partnership program. They canceled that round and opened up a new round, which has similar guidance, a little bit different. And so we're planning to reapply under a little bit of a change for the Eugene Deep Over Layover track, as well as the Will Bridge crossover replacement. And again, those 2 projects would really hope to speed up on-time performance, speed up the travel of the train, but also increase reliability and sort of reduce some of the uncertainties that you get in some of those areas. And then looking forward to making investments in Portland Union Station. For those of you who haven't, maybe get over there and take a tour and look how that's looking. It's a beautiful building that just needs some serious investments to operate as a rail corridor, but also the whole area and community could use some economic development. So I was really excited about the Amtrak presentation where we heard about those type of investments as well. So that was great. And then let's get to the success story. Our ridership has really grown. We had record ridership all throughout 2024. We've really worked hard to rebuild the ridership since the pandemic. The pandemic, you can see, is the low point there. And we actually reduced service way down. I think we had 1 trip per day going for quite a while there. And we've been building back up ever since. The different colors here just denote the different calendar years. So you'll see that you've got some seasonal spikes there, but basically we're on an upward trend and we're increasing ridership consistently. So it's been a really exciting story. And just to share a little bit about our marketing campaigns, I really like the imagery that we have here and the ways in which we're investing, working on existing riders and getting that brand loyalty, getting people coming back, feeling like they're a part of something and using the system, working on getting new riders, focusing on destinations, places you can go, Again, as a user, I know that sports games are really popular. So if you try to take the train on Sundays up to Seattle or back, you probably are running into a lot of people in jerseys. Getting people connected to the trains, first mile, last mile, and helping them solve for how they're going to get there, and then celebrating some of our sponsorships as well. So just really have been investing in that into our website and into those specialty marketing. And with that, I think I'm at the end of my run here. I'm going to turn over to Jason.
All right. Thank you. Good afternoon. I see lots of familiar faces in the crowd, some that I haven't seen in a long time. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Jason Biggs. I'm the director for the Washington State Department of Transportation Rail, Freight, and Ports Division. I'm going to complement the information that Susan provided. I'm going to structure my slides as what are we doing now? What's just around the corner? And what does the future look like? You advance the slide. This is going to be a bit of a reveal, but I know many of you rode the train down here. Many of you have ridden the train. If I was to ask, what is your number one frustration on the train? I bet I can guess what it is. Dan Bucks did tell me that he had the best cup of coffee he's ever had on a train on the Amtrak Cascade. So it's not the coffee. It's going to be this. It's going to be the on-time performance. So this is our on-time performance. There are 4 lines up here, 3 years prior. The one with the diamonds that you see on here is 2025. Our on-time performance hovers, in the mid 50s up to just below 70%, up to the high 60s. I'm going to frame this as a better news story. It's not a good news story, but it's a better news story. Because can we do better? Yes. Is this a top priority for WSDOT and for ODOT? Yes. Are we trending up? Yes. So better. But let's talk about what contributes to the on-time performance delays that we see out on the Amtrak Cascade services. So each one of these dots represents kind of in magnitude the type of delays. Those numbers that you see here and there are minutes of delay that are imposed upon the trains. So 10,000 minutes and so forth. This is through January through May. It takes a little while to process the data. It doesn't matter if this was through October because those top 5 delays are our top 5 delays and historically always been our top 5 delays. Starting out at number 1, our largest delay is freight train interference. Anytime a freight train interferes or delays one of our Amtrak Cascades trains, that's what freight train interference is. This one's a little less intuitive, passenger train interference. You wouldn't think that that would happen out there. We have commuter trains. We have our long distance trains. We have Amtrak Cascades trains. There's meet passes. When they interfere with one another, because perhaps one's out of slots, that's passenger train interference. Slow orders, these are planned or unplanned. This is where the track speed has been reduced from its signed track speed, and the trains have to reduce in speeds, contributing to on-time performance delays. Equipment failure. Who's been on the Amtrak Cascades when there's been an equipment failure? I was hoping for no hands. Okay. Well, so that's number 4. So that either can be when it's called for service, that the equipment's available. If it's not available, it's going to contribute to performance delays. And if it dies en route, and hopefully none of you had one where it dies en route and you had a bus bridge. And if you had, well, I'm sorry for that. And then lastly, routing delays. So there are optimal routes, of course, on the Amtrak Cascades, but if there's crossover moves that they have to go through, there's platforms that were unplanned. Perhaps there's a siding they had to wait for. These routing delays are our 4th. So there's ways we can mitigate this, and there are ways that we are mitigating that. So that's through operations and through capital. So I'll talk a little bit on the operations. Last year at this very conference, Kirk Fredrickson on my team spoke to you all. He is in charge of our on-time performance task force. He's also our passenger rail program manager. So he's going to be meeting with BNSF. I know you're in the room here, and Amtrak next week. So we have data. We don't need more data. It's just how we're using the data to be smarter with how we're using the data. So we know by train, we know by segment. So we're taking that data, we're working with Amtrak and the host railroads to be smarter and implement either operational fixes. And so that'll be a very intense discussion, or schedule changes. And schedule changes don't happen overnight, but seeing if there's ways we can adjust the schedule to get better on-time performance. Infrastructure. So infrastructure can improve on-time performance. So this is a little bit of looking to the future, but the type of projects that can improve on-time performance, we have mainline tracks, siding tracks, longer siding tracks. We're seeing longer trains out on the railroads, so we need to extend those siding tracks, platforms, catchment walls. Many things that we can do. So I know many of you are familiar that there's a National Railroad Partnership grant that's been advertised. Applications are due on the 7th of January. So you naturally is WSDOT going to apply for that for an OTP project to improve performance? That's a maybe, but the answer is likely yes. So we're working with BNSF. We have 4 candidate projects. We're looking at a smaller scale. So Suzanne talked about difficult legislative sessions. We have our legislative members in the room. We're able to take a small amount of state funds, about $2 million, and leverage it from 20 to 80% toward a $10 million project that would go to on-time performance. We haven't identified that yet, but we have every intent to do a project to apply to improve our on-time performance. This is a bit of a double benefit. And the reason I want to highlight this is because it has an on-time performance component to it. The primary purpose of this is Amtrak is going through their national system, including out here in the Pacific Northwest, and updating the stations for better accessibility. So that is a win. So in Washington, Centralia, a second flat platform will begin construction in 2026. Carlson and Vancouver are in design. Vancouver, a pretty unique and challenging area. In Oregon, there have been 3 completed. That's Albany, Oregon City, and Chemult, either in design or construction, Eugene, Salem, and Portland, and then Klamath Falls. But why are these 2 for? Because, for instance, while it's accessibility, the second platform also provides options. So those routing delays that were our number 5th delay, this provides, again, opportunity. So now you have 2 platforms. As long as the customers know where they need to go, this can help reduce on-time performance. So we're very excited to see this program move forward. And it may seem, while we talk about difficult legislative sessions, small projects that we're not doing much to promote or to benefit in terms of capital projects, the Amtrak Cascade service. We have between equipment and projects underway now over $500 million that is going into the system to benefit Amtrak Cascades. So I'll just highlight very quickly some of these projects. The Seattle Maintenance Facility. So when you think of equipment, you have to think of facilities. They go hand in hand. I have a slide on the new equipment, but this is the maintenance facility underway, and construction will be done in late 2026 that will service the new Aero train sets that will become part of the fleet for Amtrak Cascades. In an earlier panel, you heard from Johan Hellman. He talked about the Salmon Bay Bridge. This is a BNSF infrastructure or bridge of regional infrastructure importance. It is the north-south route. It opens over the ship canal for the marine traffic, closes for train traffic, about 30 to 40 trains per day. That includes Sound Transit, long distance, Amtrak Cascades, BNSF, and UP. If this bridge were to go out, it would be a catastrophic transportation failure. This also falls under the preservation and maintenance category. This is not immune to just rail alone. If you look across all of our modes, preservation and maintenance is needed. So the superstructure has to be replaced. But the real key with project or component of this project is the partnership component. The legislature, Washington State Legislature at the time, did not have match funding available to contribute to this. BNSF had match funding. We worked collaboratively together where we took the talent of the rail, freight, and ports team. We know how to get grants, and we're very successful with getting grants. So we applied for the grant as a state agency because BNSF's not eligible. We were successful, and this $110 million project is underway and will be wrapped up in 2028. And if you get a chance to get out there, it's some pretty neat construction. Landslide mitigation. So $12 million in construction going on. This will be wrapped up in 2028. This program's going to close and come to an end, and that's a good thing. All the high frequency and high severity locations, and I see someone who used to work for WSDOT is nodding his head to help on those projects. We have mitigated those. So our last project will wrap up in 2028, and every place that we've either put a retaining wall or a catchment wall, they've been 100% successful. Why is that important? Because if material overtops from a landslide, the rails, it's a 48-hour moratorium, 2 days, 2-day minimum, and then has to be reassessed. And if it's not stable, that moratorium continues. So again, this has been a really beneficial and important program, and it'll be closing out. And then finally, under our last grant round, this is just a very small project. It's about a $13 million project, new switches. This is increasing some speeds out there. And then also, we're kind of seeing more extreme weather events in the Pacific Northwest. We're seeing colder weather during the wintertime, hotter weather during the summer, but this is to provide switch heaters. So we don't get those on-time performance delays based on stuck switches. All right, so that's what we're doing in the near term. So what's around the corner? Very exciting. New equipment. So equipment is the heart of the service. We'll be receiving 8 new train sets, 2 new locomotives, 1 new cab car, to complement our existing fleet of 8 locomotives that are out there. These are going to be the most modern train sets in all of North America. We'll have 300 seats per train set, which almost doubles the capacity of what we have out there now with the Horizon cars. I have a few shots out here. That one up in the top right-hand side, that is not a simulation. So in terms of the schedule for these new train sets, this is a train set number 1, leaving the facility in Sacramento, so in Elk Grove, just a suburb outside of Sacramento. It is leaving to head toward Colorado. There's a test track facility in Colorado called TTCI. It's already there. On October 27th, it will leave TTCI and then head over to the Northeast Corridor, the NEC, the Amtrak-owned corridor, for testing. All 8 train sets, as they come off the production line, will end up on the NEC. And then they'll come back to the Pacific Northwest, where they'll be tested and then placed into revenue service. They'll be placed into revenue service in 2026. I know that's not a satisfying answer, right? You want to know when you can buy your ticket for these new train sets, but based on the delivery schedule and some minor delays that we've seen, it's probably going to be mid to late. The other thing is planning in terms of how many train sets do you need for operations? So we have Vancouver all the way down to Eugene. It isn't just as simple as a 1-for-1 ratio, especially with the ticketing systems. So there's a minimum amount of trains we want to introduce in bulk or in a block. It's usually three to 4. So that's all part of the planning process. I'll share a little side story. Maybe some of you might have heard this, but with the introduction of these new train sets via rail, so the Amtrak of Canada, they are probably the last entity to introduce new train sets. It was the previous generation of these. It was the venture cars. These are the aero cars, kind of the 2.0 adventure cars. So we met with via rail, my counterpart, Laurence Lefrancois up there, and it was, what do we need to know when we introduce new train sets? Like, what's the most important thing? She had like a really simple answer. She's like, everything is just better. And so she's like, it's the same route, it's the same food on board, but the experience is just better. So we're waiting for our everything just better moment here on the Cascades. So around the corner here. Now looking off to the future, Suzanne talked about state rail plans. We too have our state rail plan. That is that strategic blueprint for both passenger and freight, right? Sets the policy, sets the strategic direction that we want to go. This is a result of the surveys that we've had. Very similar to Oregon's. Mobility and safety came out number 1. I think, based on Representative Leavitt's comments, as a DOT, we would certainly say safety is number 1, but based on the survey results, mobility, and that is to streamline the rail network as part of a statewide multimodal transportation system. Safety, right? That's not just on the rails, but at our grade crossings also. Preservation, again, a big one for all transportation modes, but ensure the assets and future investments are preserved and maintained. Stewardship, making sure it serves all of Washington, right? Benefits all the communities. The environment, that is consistent with the goals that we have here in the state of Washington toward greenhouse gas emission reduction, environmental stewardship, and then economic vitality. And I think this is a really important one also, because we're one of the most trade dependent states in the union. If you think of all of our ports, we need to be able to continue to move people, to continue to move freight. And so these are the priorities that we've seen out of the state rail plan. We'll be doing a public open houses, or at least information about our analysis in fall. There'll be the draft that'll be published just after the new year. And then probably the end of Q1 will be the final publication of our Washington State Rail Plan. So there'll be some opportunities to see and interact with that plan as we move forward. So you have the State Rail Plan, then we have our Service Development Plan for the Amtrak Cascades. So similar to what they've done in Oregon, we have legislation. I want to thank the legislators in the room here for sponsoring this and their vision. So this is engrossed Senate House Bill 1837 for passenger rail priorities in the state of Washington. What this bill does is sets our North Star, right? This is our strategic direction for Amtrak Cascades. So 14 round trips, so increasing round trips, 14 round trips between Seattle and Portland, 5 round trips between Seattle up to Vancouver. This is over the next 10 years, faster travel times, faster speeds, better connectivity, first and last mile, better on-time performance, absolutely. And then also making sure that we're in alignment with our greenhouse gas emission reduction goals as a state. So taking that as the foundation, we're going to blend that into our service development plan. We're going to start that process here soon. There's been little hiccups because of the shutdown with the federal government. But I don't want to talk necessarily about the service development plan itself. It's a plan. It's going to set our strategic blueprint. It's going to be that model that we'll then seek investments for. What I really want to talk about is the process for the service development plan, that corridor identification and development. And there's a couple key things why this is important. There's no magic in these arrows here. This is a standard life cycle of a project. You go from scoping to planning to design to construction to operations. But from a federal dollars perspective, intercity passenger rail, we've been directed by the legislature to seek federal funds because it is an investment. It's a huge investment. And I don't think that any legislature, because of all the modes that they have to provide, can alone with state dollars fund, one mode over the other. So we need that federal investment. There aren't formula funds that come to intercity passenger rail. Intercity passenger rails, I'd say in the world of transportation, fairly new. I mean, 2013 was when the legislation went into effect, the Passenger Rail Improvement Act that created that designation of intercity passenger rail. But it didn't come with like FHWA on the highway systems formula funds. Transit comes with formula funds. Everything is discretionary and competitive. So this is about as close as we're going to get to a formula fund. And this is why it's so important that Washington, Oregon, and Washington Amtrak Cascades and the high-speed rail program are part of this CID process. So just walking through the various steps, there is no match that's required for scoping. Washington, Oregon, and the high-speed program have made it through that step. Then it goes into planning. It's a 10% state match, 90% federal match. And then every step beyond that is an 80-20. So us being in this program, us going through these steps makes us competitive, allows us to get access to the federal funds. And not only that, the other part is no one's going to invest their funds if they know that it can't be implemented. So not only does the states of Washington, Oregon have to agree to this plan, our stakeholders, FRA, but the host railroads. So that's another powerful aspect of this. They need to provide concurrence to this plan to make sure that as we progress, incrementally add more service, that those projects are implementable. All right, and finally here, when we're thinking about future planning, does the existing system out there for Amtrak Cascades have capacity? Yeah, absolutely. Does I-5 and I-9, I mean, do all our modes have capacity now? Yes. Will they into the future? No, we're seeing regional growth. So there's some type of transportation option we need to be thinking about into the future. And part of my job and our team is to coordinate with the high-speed rail team as part of that transportation option. And it's really important that that coordination really stresses is high-speed rail. I know it's not a replacement for the Amtrak Cascades. It is a complement to the Amtrak Cascades. We are the regional service. If you've been to the DC up to New York on the Northeast corridor, you can ride the regionals or you can ride the Acela, the express service. So that could be one of the futures that we have out here. And one of the reasons I'm excited to be coordinating with Chelsea and her team. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to you for the high-speed rail update. Thank you.
Great. That was a perfect lead in. Thank you so much, Jason. Hello, I'm Chelsea Levy. I'm the project manager for Cascadia High-Speed Rail. Let me advance these slides here. It was very exciting to hear about that work currently occurring on Cascades. I thought when those pictures of the vehicles came up, we would hear some oohs and ahs. I kind of wanted to ooh and ah. But it's exciting work, and it's a really important collaboration between the high-speed rail team and the Cascades team. And it's really an opportunity that we have now to be advancing this long-range planning, both for Cascades and for high-speed rail simultaneously, because we really are, as a region, as a mega region, working to build a network of transportation options. So I want to start with why we're having this conversation about potentially adding high-speed rail as an additional travel option. Jason kind of led us there, but let me say a little bit more about the growth this mega region is anticipated to experience. So we are in the Cascadia mega region. I imagine that is a term that some of you have heard, but maybe not all of you. The Cascadia mega region generally extends from Portland, the metropolitan area of here, Portland, Oregon, up to Vancouver, British Columbia. Research from the Cascadia Innovation Corridor projects that this mega region is anticipated to grow by 3 to 4 million people by 2050. That's nearly a 25% population increase compared to today. Not to scare you, but that's the equivalent of adding approximately the population of a city the size of Los Angeles on top of those of us who are currently living in the mega region today. This is a tremendous amount of growth that we're anticipated to experience here in the mega region. It creates challenges, but it also creates opportunities. And that's why we're starting to do this early planning work to envision additional options for transportation in the mega region. This is a pace and magnitude of growth that requires us to act. We have the opportunity and really the responsibility to plan a transportation network that both invests in existing infrastructure, so we were just talking about, as well as provides new travel options to meet future demand. This is critical to maintaining our mega region's economic competitiveness, not just in the US and Canada, but really our competitiveness around the world. At Cascadia High-Speed Rail, our transportation focus is part of a broader conversation about this growth that must be done in close collaboration and coordination with other aspects of mega region, regional planning, such as land use, as well as economic development planning for the entire mega region. In the next 25 years, so if you imagine 25 years from now and what's currently happening today, we also expect to see not only greater strains and constraints in our transportation system, but also strains on the transportation network caused by increased extreme weather and natural hazards. This means that we need to be planning for, and then investing in more resilient transportation to respond to changes in the climate and weather events. So as I said, we are planning for and building an integrated transportation network, and that's why WSDOT has combined now this work of Cascadia High-Speed Rail with development of an I-5 master plan under a mega program called the Cascadia program. We are coordinating our planning work for the long-range vision for I-5 with the I-5 master plan program, and we're collaborating closely with Suzanne and Jason on the Amtrak Cascades planning. So although we are considering all the ways that people and goods move around the region for local, regional, and broader mega region trips, our focus for Cascadia High-Speed Rail is really meeting the transportation demand for the mega region trips that you see on the right side of the screen here. You see both high-speed rail and Amtrak Cascades listed as mega region trips. Our baseline assumption, as Jason alluded to, is that high-speed rail would not eliminate the need for air travel, for regional light rail, or Amtrak Cascades investments, but instead would consider the potential for connections to and from these modes so that high-speed rail is accessible and planned for within a connected network. I can't emphasize enough the importance of a connected network to be able to respond to the type of growth that we're anticipating. Zooming in a little bit more on these mega region trips, as we've been talking about, existing transportation modes already face significant constraints. We've all experienced highway congestion. It creates unreliable travel times for both people and freight. We've talked already a little bit about shared tracks for Amtrak Cascades that are owned by the freight railroads. They have limited capacity to expand, which can create performance and reliability challenges. And then when you think about the other mode of transportation across the mega region, we think about air travel. Well, flights within the mega region face delays, in part because existing airport capacity and opportunities for expansion are really limited. So planning for high-speed rail, we are planning for high-speed rail to address these challenges. This is not new planning. And on the next 4 slides, I'll provide some history on the work related to high-speed rail to date. Here's a reminder of how we got here to 2025. Well, back in 2016, Cascadia High-Speed Rail was initially socialized as a concept at the Cascadia Innovation Corridor Conference. And since then, Washington, Oregon, British Columbia, and the private sector have all contributed funding for the initial studies listed here on this slide that have led to federal grant applications in 2023. And as a result, WSDOT received an award through the U.S. Federal Railroad Administration's Corridor Identification and Development Program, CID, that Jason just described in detail. And in 2024, after working through step 1 of the CID process for high-speed rail, WSDOT was awarded additional federal funds, including a Washington State funding match to enter into our current phase of work for early planning, which will culminate. This phase we're in will culminate in what FRA terms a service development plan. And we spoke a little bit about that earlier related to Amtrak Cascades. So it's so important to note that this early work for Cascadia High-Speed Rail would not be possible without strong collaboration and commitment from the partners whose logos are listed here on the screen. This is an important partnership between Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, and the private sector. The organizations listed here are the backbone of the work, and we continue to work regularly together and collaborate to advance this planning. So let's get into a little bit more of the details of what this work entails. This looks familiar to you. Jason described this in detail. I'm not going to go back through this, but it is important to reiterate that we are now in this federal funding. We're in this federal process. We are, for Cascadia High-Speed Rail, are in the orange arrow project development to develop a service development plan. And we are looking to meet all of the expectations from the Federal Railroad Administration to meet their outcomes and proceed through this process and into ultimately final design, construction, and operations. But there are quite a few steps to get there before we do. So these are the major activities of the service development plan that are to be completed by 2028. The plan is defined by FRA as designed as a prescriptive series of tasks to confirm the viability of the project in early planning. We have 3 key tasks to complete this year, and our team has been churning to develop them. You can see them noted on this screen. It's a combination of coordination plans that identify how we will engage and coordinate with communities, tribes, First Nations, agencies, railroads, the private sector, and other interested parties as we get into the technical work. Engagement is a very important part of this process, and that's why these coordination plans were developed up front. The preliminary draft purpose and needs statement is another deliverable for this year. This is not a NEPA level purpose and needs statement, but it describes the need for the project narrowly within FRA's statutory authority. And then lastly, this year we've been working to develop a mega region-wide market analysis that really looks at population employment growth opportunities across the mega region between BC and Portland. And then looking ahead, starting in 2026, so just a few short months from now, we will begin to evaluate existing physical and environmental constraints and consider operating requirements for potential corridor options. Through this process, in the years 26 and 27, we may identify multiple viable routes for further study, and that further study would occur after the service development plan. So we are in a planning phase now that will last several years. Specific station locations will be identified and evaluated in that future planning phase after the service development plan. But also in 2026, we'll begin to identify potential governance options as well as financial options for how the project could be administered and funded throughout the project life cycle, not only through construction, but also into long-term operations of a high-speed rail system. And all of this work will be overlaid, importantly, with public engagement and engagement with key stakeholders at key milestones. So while I wrap up here, it's an important part of this early planning is to understand lessons learned from other domestic and international high-speed rail projects. Many of the lessons learned from other projects fall into these 5 categories. We're incorporating these lessons into our early planning approach for the service development plan and being thoughtful about how these lessons might apply to our unique geography here in the Puget Sound region and throughout the mega region. So that is a brief overview of our work, but it's really been a pleasure to introduce this project to you, and I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Chelsea, Suzanne, and Jason. I'm going to make my way up to the stage here, moderate some questions that we have from the audience. I want to kind of step back and talk about how we started talking about the what is happening here in the Cascadia region. And as soon as 15 minutes from now, when legislators come up on stage, we'll talk about the how. How are we going to get to the vision we have for the future of Washington, Oregon regional rail? But first, a couple questions that are coming up online, and I'll ask you these questions, and of course, defer to your judgment on how much you can and can't answer, what you can say. Of course, these folks are not at liberty to talk a lot about the rationale behind some of the work that they do. Simply, they do the work that they are instructed to by the legislatures. But the question, did ODOT's computer modeling for the service development plan evaluate the possibility of future regional passenger rail service between Portland and Salem, stopping at Milwaukee, Oregon City, Canby, and Woodburn?
This would help. We did not model it looking at additional stops. We had modeled it using the current configuration. So going from Portland, Oregon City, Salem, Albany, and Eugene, focused on service in that area. Anything to add? Okay. Thanks for the question.
Great. It's a question for both of you, though. If you look in Hoover, it's directed for Jason, but question for DOTs generally. You mentioned, I think, meeting existing regional rail service. The question is kind of why is that the goal? Why not be proactive and forward-looking and try to improve on-time performance and increase demand rather than simply meet existing demand? Why aren't we looking to the future and trying to create more demand for intercity rail transit?
Okay, so I'm going to interpret that a little bit, but I think that question purely framed as we are. I mean, that's the purpose of a service development plan, is to look at that future demand, what infrastructure, what equipment, what operational necessities to meet that future demand. So absolutely, that's what we're doing. That's why we're identifying, 14 plus round trips between Seattle and Portland, 5 round trips up to Vancouver, British Columbia. I will say that in the context of our state rail plans, again, that's a blueprint that talks about the policy, what are the values, where do we want to take rail as a whole. We also acknowledge the work that others are doing in terms of east-west connectivity also, such as the North Coast Hiawatha, it's out there, and including the high-speed rail service.
Thanks. And that gets to the next question, actually, talking about the mega region. And that map shows it stretching from Vancouver all the way to Portland, but not going east of the mountains. And as the question here in the app points out, there's quite a few communities east of the mountains, both in Washington and Oregon, that are not included in that mega region. So what's the thought behind how the mega region was formed and or decided, and how do we include planning for communities east of the mountains?
All right, so I'll start this off. I'm going to take it first in the context of the Amtrak Cascade service. So that is the legislatively sponsored intercity passenger rail service that we have here in Washington. So we have legislation that gives us goals about how we're to plan and grow that service. So that's a base and that's a fundamental item. Then we have our state rail plan. And in order for us to get the information about where should we take the future of both passenger and freight, as we look in the concepts of the strategic blueprint, that's where these surveys come in really important. That's where we need to hear from the communities. And we have heard that east-west service is an interest area. Now, the state rail plan doesn't get out into the details of any kind of modeling. That's not the purpose of the state rail plan. So that would be a service development plan once a service has been identified.
I'll add to that. So we've actually run, so we do have a study. We've just completed a study together with, I think it was 15 routes across the country, looking at where Amtrak should expand. And the historic Pioneer route, many people are familiar with, and we've got some advocates for that service. Cost estimates to bring that back to life are going to be in the couple of $2 billion. It's going to be hard to get there because I think we're focusing right now on how do we get our Amtrak Cascade service really good and really dialed in and increase on-time performance. So that's certainly a stretch goal, but that's far in the future. I can also tell you that we run bus service there now, once a day. We have 2 different routes and they both are cutting service. I hate to say that. With my transit hat, my group also runs transit service, and we have a point bus service that goes from Bend to Ontario, I think it is. And we're cutting a couple days a week there. We just haven't been able to sustain the number of riders. It's sometimes is 1 or 2 or 0 people on that trip. And then we also had a Greyhound historic route that had to cut a leg specifically in the easternmost part of that route. So we're looking at ways to stand that back up and work with those partners in private industry to stand that up and get folks going back to Boise and to Salt Lake City. So there's a lot of interest in that. But I think right now, if you sort of put aside what the technology is and think about the travel opportunity, investing in bus and getting those bus systems really working well so people can make the trip is kind of our first priority. And then a future priority, funds allowing, might be to get back into rail service there.
Questions in the room here? I see one there. I'm gonna take one. So sorry.
Hi, I want to thank each of the panelists for coming. It's been extremely illuminating. My question is that the Cascadia high-speed corridor, as discussed in Chelsea's presentation, my assumption is, are you looking to do it in stages, for example, like the interstate highway system? I've read some reports that there are real opportunities to do this in segments, like between, I think, Kelso and Nisqually. It would be relatively easy, quote unquote, to build a 3rd main track dedicated for passengers at 125 plus. Or are you looking at like the TGV in France, where they built an entirely new line that has a dedicated fenced right away, no grade crossings, extreme high speed. So are you looking to get to that point in intermediate stages, or that would seem to be the logical way to do it? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. The answer is both. So in this early planning phase, we are really looking to identify a viable corridor to operate fast trains in. FRA does have a component of their service development plan that asks for implementation, and segmentation is part of that as well. And we'll be offering options and recommendations for that. But in this early first phase, we'll really be looking corridor wide, 345 miles wide, to identify a potential corridor for a route, and then a future step in this service development plan process. We'll look at the potential for segmentation. That's all part of implementation later on, though. Yeah.
Hi, I've got a question that I would like you to comment on. In the more recent minutes, you've been talking about the mega region that goes from Vancouver, BC. The southern end is Portland. 70% of the state's population, roughly 3 million people, live in the Willamette Valley between Portland and Eugene. We haven't been hearing in the last half hour or so, what are the plans for improving passenger rail service in Oregon? Because it's not included in the plan for the high or highest speed rail. Yet 70% of the state's population needs to be able to get around more efficiently and cost effectively.
Thank you, Representative Nathanson. Unfortunately, Justin did hand me the mic Jason, sorry, to address this question. I think right now we're really investing in Amtrak Cascades, as you know, and as you've been quite a champion of. We just really haven't seen the numbers yet. It's maybe similar to my other answer about sending rail east of the Cascades. We would need to, I think, project higher ridership to sort of, I don't mean to say justify, but to sort of create that plan and to start investing in that direction. I mean, I would love to see it. But I think right now, just increasing the on-time performance and doing the best we can with what we have and working on the planning, which you didn't mention this, but I want to say it's a 30-year horizon, right? Before we're really looking at putting people in seats on some of those trips. So that would definitely be the expansion opportunity. Thanks.
Bruce Agnew with the Accelerator at Pinware. Tomorrow we have an Amtrak board member, Elaine Clegg, I think maybe this afternoon, talk about Amtrak funding in the future. But under the bipartisan bill under the Biden administration, it was, I think, 66 billion for Amtrak and set asides for high-speed rail money, which I think that's how the pot that was applied for and secured with state match. Looking to the future, we have a new administration. We don't know what the Amtrak budget will be. We do know that the administration is proposing to pull funding from the California high-speed rail and reprogram that for traditional federal-state partnership programs, which are programs that we tend to apply for and do well in this region. But they've also said that they like the Bright Line, which is a privately operated rail line between the outskirts of LA and Las Vegas, which is a $12 billion project, and I think $2.5 billion of federal loan. My question to you in the planning process, early in the planning process, is what role do you see, or what role would the consultants look at in terms of private sector partnerships for funding, right-of-way acquisition, or possibly operating the train?
Good question. The private sector has, since the beginning of the Cascadia high-speed rail conversation, been an important partner in the early planning work, and I imagine will continue to be an important partner as we work through not only route identification, but also that long-term governance and funding task that you saw in one of the slides there. And so really our responsibility in this phase of work to develop the service development plan is to identify options for long-term governance as well as funding, and opportunities like P3s or other private funding federal and private sector funding partnerships are certainly on the table. So that's part of the work ahead of us in the next couple of years.
We're really grilling you today, you guys.
My question, I think, has to do with priorities. I believe a number of years ago, there was an agreement between the railroads and Amtrak Cascades to have, I believe the number was 14 trips a day between Seattle and Portland at 110-mile-an-hour service. That agreement lapsed in 2023. I think that's because a lot of the priority shifted to this ultra high-speed rail conversation. My question is, how can we have we let ourselves get too distracted with this pursuit of ultra high-speed rail at the expense of a service that we already have and we know is successful, and we know that could be upgraded with a relatively much smaller investment?
So I'm going to go answer this in a couple of points here. So I'm very familiar with the agreement that you're talking about. That was with the Washington State Department of Transportation and BNSF. It was a 20-year agreement, so it started 20 years ago. I think before there was a 1993 study about ultra high-speed ground transportation. So there was some idea of high-speed rail that was out there, but not in the form that we see now, not the investments that we're seeing now. That didn't, in my opinion, drive that agreement. That agreement was really about intercity passenger rail investments. So before my predecessors established that agreement, it was a way to then provide funding to BNSF for construction through a task order process. That was the fundamental basis for that agreement. Yes, it was set up for 20 years. It did have 110 miles an hour in it. It did have other numbers of round trips, but it also had very specific language that those were concept plans. They had to be validated. They had to be funded by WSDOT, and they had to be represented in plans. And so portions of those elements never came to fruition.
We have time for one last question. Did you have a question? Yeah.
Thanks for the opportunity. I'm Mary Patterson. I work with Solutionary Rail, and that's a member of the Rail Can't Wait Coalition. I guess there was silence in the room, and I felt a lot of disappointment myself when we heard that Pioneer service is way back burner and that we may get buses instead. And similarly for east-west service through central Washington. What would it take to bring those projects to the front burner for our both state departments of transportation? Do you need much stronger direction from the legislature, such as you got with Amtrak Cascades last year?
Short version is projection of ridership that would justify the investment as well as funds to stand it up. I think those would be two big things. If we got direction from the legislature, that would be them committing to making an investment to potentially $2 billion to stand that back up. So I don't mean to be negative Nancy, but this is not a cheap proposition. So bus is not meant to be like a, stepchild or something. It's meant to be, this is the way that I think we can functionally provide for the trips there until a future state when those two things come to fruition.
So if we got legislative direction, that would tell us what to do. So I agree that that would be a very upfront way to move that forward. But I think the work that you're doing, the advocacy work, working with your regional planning, RPO, your municipal planning organizations, your regional transportation organizations, advocating for this type of service, there has to be data behind it to support it. But I think the work that you're doing is getting there. It's going to be a process. And there are existing studies that are out there, as you're aware, that provide, projections of utilization, cost data. Those would have to be updated also.
Well, thank you. And on that topic, we will have a number of sessions tomorrow that touch on the Pioneer and restoring passenger rail service through Eastern Oregon, Southern Idaho onto Salt Lake City. We also will finish the entire summit with a fireside chat with the mayor of Portland, Keith Wilson, and Councilor Ashton Simpson, talking about the future of Portland as a passenger rail hub. And spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about high-speed rail as well. So all these topics are going to come up again tomorrow. If you aren't planning to stick around, please do. But for today, I want to say thank you to our panelists. Give them a round of applause.